Welcome to today's episode of Lead From Within, where I was delighted to be joined by Phillippa O'Connor, Chief People Officer at PwC UK. We had such an interesting and wide-ranging conversation, from the importance of balance in the workplace through to the importance of psychological safety, the risk of burnout. We also talked about how AI is disrupting the workplace and how that's impacting on different generations. And we ended by reflecting on the criticality of embedding the human at the centre of the future of work. Please do like and subscribe to Lead From Within, wherever you get your podcasts. We've got some fantastic episodes coming up, and I know you won't want to miss them. Welcome to Lead From Within, the podcast for people leaders that explores the fascinating intersection of mental health, leadership, and performance. Phillippa, thank you so much for joining today. I've been so looking forward to the conversation. I'd love to start by asking about you, about who you were. Who were you growing up? Tell me about your childhood.
So I'm the only child of two fairly hardworking parents. My mum was an accountant that worked for Devon County Council, and my dad was in the Navy. And so it was childhood where he was away a lot. So my mum and I are quite close, but actually my dad and I are quite close too. But that sort of environment of a kind of working ethos was definitely kind of part of that.
Kind of a Portsmouth area, was that?
So I grew up in Devon,
Okay.
And actually because my mum had a career, which was quite unusual at that point in time, my dad moved around. So whereas most sort of naval brats are dragged all around the place, we were very much kind of centred in Devon, and then he sort of came back to us from wherever he'd been at various points in time in various places in the UK and around the world.
Go on.
Right, I was going to say, and actually, you know, that worked for me. A very kind of, I guess in that context, a more stable sort of upbringing than many kind of military kids managed to have. And I was heavily into sort of horse riding kind of all through my childhood and quite competitively in my teens.
Do you think so? I'm imagining with accountancy and being in the military, kind of structure and logic and order were quite kind of prevalent themes.
Yeah, is that true? So, I mean, yes, naval time is 5 minutes before time. I still feel slightly physically sick if I'm late for meetings.
Right.
And that is something embedded in me as a really kind of young child. Equally, kind of, I think actually more what I took from it, they loved what they did. So, you know, my mum definitely, huge pride in what she did. She was the first to go to university from her family. She was a really kind of high achiever. But my dad got out of bed every day, you know, loved his family, but went off to do these really difficult things in far-flung places, grounded in absolute inspiration of what he did, where he worked, the impact he was having. And that's probably the more fundamental thing that has stayed with me, I think, as I've then gone on to do different things in my career.
And has that kind of, because the Navy has a strong culture, doesn't it? As an organisation, has that informed what you've sought in your profession, looking for those strong cultures?
I think it's definitely informed the perspective I have on leadership and its importance, and the kind of tenet that needs to be to any organisation. And I'd say that in this role, but I'd also say that in the way I've looked at clients and advised clients over time. I think as well, in terms of what have I looked for, it's that enjoyment bit. It's needing to find a career that really gave me joy, that gave me kind of passion for what I did. I think that has been really central to as I've gone through roles and looked for things. That's been really key.
Would you attribute your parents, their passion and their love of what they did?
Yeah.
Drove you? That's
Yeah,
interesting.
definitely.
And horses and Devon are kind of somewhat synonymous. You've got the space and the beautiful countryside. And were you naturally drawn to them, or how did that come about?
We lived in the middle of nowhere and I needed to find something to do. I think it was much more fundamental than that. And this wasn't fancy horses. This was a farm up the road that had some horses. This lady called Mrs. Spruce, who kind of enabled all the local kind of school kids to go and sort of ride horses. And so it was ramshackle in the fields, but great fun and outside. And, you know, I guess if I look forward, kind of the need for balance and the need that kind of outside exercise in life, that's probably the ongoing thread of that. But there aren't any horses anymore.
And the competitiveness?
Maybe a little bit.
Yeah. But did that come, were you a competitive child across other areas?
That's a good question. I mean, I was academically competitive, but that probably was as much pressure from home as it was personal drive. And then I think wanting to be good at things, probably more than being competitive at them. I think that's probably still true.
Yeah.
In that,
and why is that?
because I have really high standards for myself and what I do. And again, that's definitely driven from childhood.
So you can more competitive with yourself or with others?
With myself.
Yeah, okay. And then, so then you're riding horses. I've got this beautiful picture of Devon right now. What then? So you get to teenage years, what's going on?
So teenage years, so there's a military pull, inevitably. And so I joined the Air Cadets. And that becomes a sort of, again, debate at home because I haven't joined the Sea Cadets.
Yeah, I was going to say.
But I knew people in the Air Cadets. And with the Air Cadets, you got to go and fly gliders. And that looked terribly exciting and like a great thing to do. So that really then drove this horse/Air Cadets balance through my teenage years when I wasn't at school. And I did get to kind of move through those grades and fly gliders. And I loved that. It was a fantastic experience. And what I really liked about it, and again, kind of links to, it was very grassroots. There was nothing about privilege in that. It was all sort of funded in terms of the way that the military kind of then fund the cadets. And so you met this really broad set of people who were all brilliant and who taught you to fly planes. It was incredibly voluntary in terms of the way the organisation worked. And it was brilliant. And I loved that. My dad got the opportunity to spend a bit of time on a naval ship when I was 17. And I skipped off this ship after sort of 5 days on board, where I'd been the cook, the fire, the bridge watch. I'd done all the different sort of jobs that were around the thing, sort of in a shadowing basis. And I said to my mum, I'm joining the Navy. And that was my sort of 17-year-old me said, this is the plan. 18, 19, 20-year-old me saw the impact on family and quite quickly pivoted to that won't work for me. And so I then began looking at the city and what came next.
Because you were looking ahead and thinking, well, I don't want to be shipping off to X, Y, and Z place.
And maybe that's an overly traditional view, but at the time it was the view. I couldn't see a world I would have a baby and then get on a ship and go back to doing that and being away from the family.
Yeah.
And to be fair to my dad, despite a lot of travel, he was around. Like I don't remember my childhood as being kind of absent father.
Yeah.
And that importance and connection with parents was really important to me. And so that was a fleeting temptation to join the military, but not one that I followed through on.
But you've got horse riding, quite high risk. As a non-horse rider, it looks high risk. Glide and non-glider looks quite high risk. So there's obviously a thread there that pulls you to these.
Yes, that's possibly true.
Yeah.
I really, and the thread probably, and the other thread to career is, I love learning new things. I am never happier than when I am out of my comfort zone, learning something, developing a skill, kind of being stretched. And so those things were the early versions of that. And there are later career versions that are sort of the same.
So how were you kind of enriching your mind during these years? Were you a big reader?
So always been a big reader.
Right.
And actually, the funny thing, gliding and horse riding, there's quite a lot sitting around. Between the things, there's awful lots of waiting for the weather to be right or waiting for the horse to be rested or, and so lots of that was spent heads in various kind of books. A lot of that initially was fiction. And then as I sort of came through GCSEs and those things, getting much more into sort of non-fiction, I studied politics, philosophy and economics. And I had no philosophy knowledge before beginning to think I might do that at university. And so I sort of digested a huge amount of philosophy kind of outside of school time in my sort of 16, 17 kind of years. And again, I think that gave me a different perspective on how I think about things.
So what A levels did you do then? What were your subjects?
So I did economics, I did maths, and I did geography.
Okay.
Which is a slightly random...
but a great subject, actually, really, really interesting. But so then you're looking at your options and then you went PPE at Oxford.
PPE at Oxford.
And then, so the philosophy was new.
Yeah.
And actually slightly more abstract than the other.
Much more abstract, and probably more abstract than I maybe am as a human, if that makes any sense. But I found it fascinating, and it sort of challenged my thinking in a way that I really enjoyed, which is why I sort of then went down the PPE route and thought that would work.
And of interest, because modern day psychology has its roots in mental philosophy.
Yeah.
Do you think there's a link between what you learned studying philosophy and ending up in people?
Oh, gosh. If it is, it's subliminal. That's the reality of that. It's definitely not conscious, but maybe subliminally.
And how did Oxford change you? How did those years? It's a great city, amazing university. What was the impact?
It was actually really fundamental for me because I found my tribe. So I'd been at an all-girls school, very competitive, and it all felt quite hothousey to me. I mean, it was fine and, clearly worked out sufficiently well academically. In Oxford, I found a group of people who sort of inherently, I suppose, were driven by being the best themselves, I felt, rather than the kind of competitive piece, and who challenged me, supported me, are still great friends. And that grounding and the confidence that that gave me changed who I was. I went from sort of being quite worried about everything to being much more kind of confident in the impact I could have in the world. And that did feel, my parents would comment, I was a different person when I left than when I joined. And I do think that, in my experience, was more about the people I met than it was about the things I learned, if that makes sense.
You came out feeling confident and then just decided not to go the military route.
Yes.
Looked to London.
I thought I'd become a management consultant. I didn't know what a management consultant was. And it's one of the things I say to our graduates about, they join us. And it's very difficult, and we're trying to do this better. But when you look externally at these big companies, what does that mean? And what will I do? And, we see people show up really not understanding what the environment is in good and bad ways. And that was definitely me. And so I applied for investment banking and management consulting. I hated all the investment banking interviews.
Right.
The arrogance of the interviews, the way the whole thing was designed to trip you up at that point in time is different now.
Yeah.
I just didn't enjoy. Whereas the management consulting, there was much more work as a team and do this, or, help me unpick this problem. And that just sat with me much better. And so when I got offers, I then decided to go down the management consulting route.
And then was it what you thought it was going to be?
So, in part, I joined a company called Towers Perrin, which has subsequently had a number of acquisitions. And the good bits, the learning was great. The bad bits, the repetition of the doing, was more than I anticipated. So we learned a load of stuff, and I was in a team doing a whole lot of stuff around data. By month 5 of the data, I began to think, where's the learning of the next bit of learning? And this data then, of course, was massive spreadsheets and kind of managing through massive spreadsheets and things. And so great grounding. And I still talk about, what I ultimately did around sort of specialisation around people and pay. Lots of this data was pay data. And the ability 20 years later to look at a spreadsheet and find the thing that's probably not quite right probably is hugely embedded in quite a boring period of time, looking at an awful lot of spreadsheets in my sort of 21, 22 years. And so that bit was great, but I wasn't learning fast enough for my liking. And so I quite quickly established I wanted to do another qualification. And so wanted to do a accountancy qualification, and they couldn't support that qualification. And that moved me to the Big Four, and I went to KPMG initially.
I'll ask you, you talked about the confidence you built at university. You often hear how when people graduate, often brilliant minds, it sounds very much kind of your profile, and then go into the working world. And then suddenly you're used to being top of class and being very successful, and suddenly you find yourself amongst peers of very brilliant people.
Yeah.
Did that knock your confidence? How did that affect you?
So it did. And I remember it. I remember the time there really positively. But I know it knocked my confidence, because I also remember those things that you remember and you can almost still paint the picture. A few months in, I did something wrong. So in this data sorting, I sorted some things, and the columns, basically, I missed a column. So the data of the thing wasn't right. And it got sent to this client. And the partner of the moment came and, expressed his displeasure in a very clear way for this, and that the client now might fire us and all these things, which I sit in this job today and think that was absolutely ludicrous. Yeah. But, the way it was landed with me was quite significant. And I remember my mum was in London and took me out for lunch. And I sat at this lunch crying and saying they're going to fire me. And I was absolutely sure in that moment I would get fired, which of course I wasn't going to get fired. I didn't get fired. It wasn't that scale of issue. I completely misrepresented what had happened. But you are, 5 months into a job, and you've never had a, long-term career kind of job before.
Yeah.
And so I think, again, one of the challenges as kind of young people join us, and we're trying to get better at this, but it's not easy. How do we build resilience, and how do we make it okay to make mistakes? Because the nature of what we do, the nature of what companies do, is mistakes get made. But no, I definitely had that coming with me.
But back then, did you have the language to, like, now we can, like you say, we say, oh, it's an imposter syndrome, or confidence, or stress, or more broadly mental health. Like, did you label it as such then?
No. then I thought I had a fact. I was telling my mother that I was going to get fired. And she, of course, was telling me that was ridiculous. But, you know, in the moment, it feels different. And I think it still probably feels different to people in that scenario. And that confidence play for, you know, those joining the workforce is tough. And we've got to think about how we kind of support them.
Yeah, you spoke about with riding how it's a balance then, which is just this kind of ideal, isn't it, that we find balance in our lives. And then you speak about the kind of pressure of that working experience. At what point, I know you're very passionate about the importance of mental health in the workplace. At what point did you start really thinking about it intentionally and realizing, okay, balance and resilience and mental health are important topics for you personally?
So, I mean, probably, if I'm honest, the back end of my 20s.
Okay.
Because so I moved from Towers Perrin to KPMG. And the deal then, because I didn't want to join as a graduate and start again, was I would do my accountancy exams and all the studying, but I wouldn't get the time off that the graduates got. So I'd like make it work in parallel, which kind of meant no weekends and not many holidays for a period of time while I sort of smashed through these exams. In hindsight, burning candle both ends too aggressively, because also it was in new job and wanted to do a good job and all those sort of things. And so, but I got through that. And then in 2007, I moved to PwC. And so I kind of did 3 or 4 years at KPMG and then I moved over. And even I knew at that point in time I needed to reset the working model. You know, I'd sort of done I'll just work every hour and that will make it work. And it had worked for me, but I was beginning to kind of see this wasn't a sustainable model. And I was far enough into my life then to think I needed a sustainable model. I also knew I'm a nicer person after I do exercise, without question. And I'm more creative, innovative person when I did that. So I'd begun to unlock for me what that looked like. And would I have termed it mental health, or would I have just termed it sort of well-being? There's some interesting things about how the last kind of 20 years has evolved.
Yeah.
But probably that was when I really made a commitment that I would reset. And I definitely operated differently in the PwC environment, and gave myself permission probably to do that than I had done before.
And did you articulate that to those around you as well?
I mean, I have done subsequently. Did I at the time? Probably. I was probably clearer coming in about, having interests. Again, there's a bit around kind of confidence about, interest that I was committed to doing and that I would do alongside being a successful, fully contributing member of the team.
Yeah.
I'd got back, probably I'd come through my imposter syndrome period to have more confidence about showing up as a whole person. And again, there's another big link there, but it's something I think is really important. And I did articulate that in a better way when I joined here than I had done before.
We were talking about it earlier about, your Whoop, wearing a wearable. And I think a lot of people now wear some form of wearable, but it is actually a communication as well, isn't it? It's telling people around you, well, I'm tracking my health and that's important to me.
Yeah.
And I think it's good role modeling, actually.
Yeah.
Showing people coming into the workforce, well, this is a topic here, and it's something I'm proud of to do.
Yeah, it's a topic of debate around our exco. So we don't all have them, but we quite sort of have some kind of wearable. Yeah. And you get into debates about sort of how green are you on your whatever, and are you getting enough sleep? Probably not. And how do we, actually, I think even at that level, it drives the right nudge behaviour to the discussion that you can have.
And normalises the topic.
Completely.
In a really positive way.
Yeah.
Along your career, and I want to kind of dig into how you've ended up in people, but have there been certain people that you've looked up to or have really shaped your journey?
Yeah, hugely so. So the first one I'd probably call out is a partner who hired me into PwC. And there are a few things about him. He's called Tom Gosling, and he led the team I joined when I came here. And I was looking between here and Deloitte when I came, and Deloitte offered me slightly more money. And I kind of came back and said, I really want to join you. If you match the money that Deloitte have offered, I really want to come to PwC. And he put his feet on the table and put his hand behind his head in a very and he said, I'm not matching the money. You're not joining here to be a manager at PwC. You're joining here to make partner. If you want to make partner, you should come to PwC. If you want the more money, you should go to Deloitte. And there's that phrase, he had me at hello. Nothing could speak more to my desire to, and it wasn't about, I want to earn the money of a partner. It's I want to develop to be able to be a partner. And so there was no question. I turned down the Deloitte offer. I joined PwC at the lower money. And he had a view about the world and what good looked like that totally aligned to kind of what I believed in, and has hugely driven who I am in terms of the way that I operate. Massive integrity in terms of the way that he operated, incredibly straightforward, said it like it was and didn't need to kind of sugarcoat it, but also kind of really strong family values, really strong approach in terms of balance and those things. And he drove that through our team in a way that I think at the time was pretty future focused. He was one of the first partners as he began to approach retirement that went to kind of a part-time levels. For a male partner to do that at that point in time was quite rare. He was exceptional. And so he's had a huge drive on kind of what that looks like for me.
And do you still think today he influences how you're operating?
Definitely. And today, he's retired and I will still catch up with him occasionally, and he nudges things in the way that he observes things that I find hugely, hugely insightful. And then the other one is a partner here she's just gone to lead our Middle East firm. But she was heavily involved when I became partner. And so I was kind of in the run up to partner. It's all very, high energy at the time. And I was pregnant. And the partnership lists were being formed, and I sort of waddled, and it is genuinely waddled, into her office. And I thought, we're going to delay this partnership. And the reality is, I'd been making partner, I'd just have had a baby, I'd be coming back. You're going to say to me, and I sort of thought about it in advance, we're going to move it out by a year, and I'm going to be okay with that because I really care about the family. I want the time to focus. And so I sort of sat down and she said, right, are we ready for partnership? I'm going on maternity leave in 2 minutes, And she was so clear. And again, it's in my belief system, but she really helped me articulate it. It doesn't matter. We want a multi-decade relationship with you. Why would we delay what we need from our valuable asset to do that? And she was so clear about the organisational benefit of this, that all the guilt I had about would I have enough to do and would I do the right thing by the firm and how would I kind of moved away. And it's, clearly in this role. But then the way I've thought about that and the way I've really championed that through our business, it's not just about women and pregnancy. There are loads of examples of this, but actually how we enable our people to show up where they are and have the confidence that they bring value. And we've already made choices that they bring value by hiring them in and supporting them. That is really fundamental to me and kind of how I lead and how I think about that now.
And it recognises, to your point, it's that whole person bringing your whole,
100%.
Be human, basically.
Yeah.
Did you have that guilt then? Was that, as you were thinking about that? Because I think it's incredibly hard to balance career and parenthood, and I think harder for women to be a mother. And
I think I've observed that is changing in the last few years in a very positive way, but certainly at the time. So did I have that guilt? Yes, on all sides. So then I had Finley, I was on maternity leave, I went through the partnership process, and then I came back in the May and made partner the 1st of July. So it was all, and the sort of whole plethora of, could I deliver in this role that I'd set up a business case to do and kind of come back into? Could I do the right thing by my team doing that? And could I make bath time, which was kind of my fundamental measure of good motherhood at that point in time? And, the guilt of never feeling I got that 100% right was really material. I had to completely retrain the team I worked with because they were used to rocking up to my office at X time and I would review whatever I needed to review, and they'd rock up at 5:30 and I'd say, I'm leaving now. And of course I could do it later and I would log back on and things, but the kind of recontracting with them about what I needed to make this work and how I would make sure I supported them to do that. Loads of guilt. And you look back and think, probably quite unnecessary guilt, but very difficult to avoid at the moment in time.
Yeah, no, I totally see that. And then when you came back, that was a big pivotal moment in your career, wasn't it? As you came back into being a partner, and tell me about that.
So you come back into being a partner, and there are lots of things. So I'd only been back in the office a couple of weeks, and they announced the partner list, and another fantastic one of our partners, Pete, came to pass my desk and said, can I have a word? And I sort of trotted after him. There is definitely something about imposter syndrome in these stories as I tell them together. And I thought, he's going to say, don't tell anyone you've made partner yet because these other people, they're disappointed, and just keep it to yourselves. And we walked around the corner to this office and he said, bloody fantastic. It is such a delight that you're going through this partnership. You're going to be fabulous. And it was, I didn't know him that well at that point in time, but it was such a lovely endorsement of the partnership as a club, as an entity that supported each other. And I hadn't seen that. You can't really see it when you're outside of it. But actually that spirit and ethos of partnership, that's why I've been here for such a long time. It's indelible, but it's amazing in terms of that. And so that helped a lot, because there was lots of imposter syndrome on the side of could I do it? And therefore him and that moment made a huge difference to me. But there was a lot of pressure and there was a lot of feeling that I needed to perform. To the mental health point, I got some really good coaching about boundaries, and I've stuck with those. And as I've had another baby later, I've returned to those boundaries. That I was absolutely clear I would get home for bath time 2 nights a week. And I would not allow the diary to sort of bleed into that. And I stuck with that really well, until Finney went to school and things change. They might move when the nights were, and they might, but I was very kind of hard over with that. And I would be home for breakfast 2 mornings a week. And they might sound like small boundaries, but for me, they were very important boundaries.
Yeah.
And it kept me connected to what was happening with him. It kept me connected to kind of what he needed, but it also enabled me to have the flex to show up at work and do the dinners that were required and the things that were required. And I would run twice a week. That was my other thing. And actually keeping to those boundaries as the pressure mounted up through perform as a partner was a hugely helpful tenet. I didn't always keep to them, but to the extent that I could, was immeasurably helpful.
I think there's something about naming the boundaries or being very clear in your own articulation about what they are. Because I think if you don't do that, if you don't draw the line in the sand, you don't know where the line is, basically. There's something you've touched obviously on imposter syndrome, but what's been interesting is the resolve to it has been the people around you.
Yeah.
Which speaks so much to a topic I know you're very passionate about, which is kind of psychological safety. Creating environments where people can essentially be themselves. So when did that become a part of your DNA as a professional?
I mean, so to the kind of people, so psychological safety's probably been a buzzword for the last probably 10 years, right? I don't think it was one before that. But we had the same thing, right? Which is how do you enable people to show up as their whole selves? I think in advising clients, probably that became more true. And I was doing a lot of boardroom advice where we needed people to be able to say it like it was. You needed an environment in a board setting where people could articulate their views. And so I probably became more attuned to it in that context. It's interesting because I think with psychological safety, there's a risk of it being misinterpreted. And I think that's still true. Because I think it can be misinterpreted as lowering performance, lowering standards in some sense. I think it's actually the complete opposite. I think if you can achieve psychological safety, if in our boundaries of the PwC environment we can do that, you actually unlock so much in terms of performance, in terms of innovation, in terms of the best of people, because they can bring their whole selves and they can speak to what they need. But I'm not sure we achieve that understanding in all contexts yet.
It's hard with a lot of these concepts around the psychology of people in the workplace. They end up being labeled as soft.
Yeah.
And they end up, I can't think of an exception off the top of my head where they don't end up at some point as being seen as a soft thing or a anti-competitive piece of a workplace amongst some circles. And I think there's a lot of work needed from the people community to actually challenge those stereotypes.
Yeah.
So how do you, when it comes to psychological safety, I'm as with any organization at PwC, there will be people who think, well, we don't have time for this. So how do you manage that?
So I tend to think nearly everything, and there are some sort of red lines that maybe, but in the people kind of strategy space, are not these fluffy, nice things. They're actually commercial imperatives. I think what I'm trying to do in terms of our people strategy is deliver on the commercial needs of the business. And the commercial needs of the business are the best, most secure, most engaged, high-performing people. And it comes back to the kind of whole self bit. So one of my challenges is we have to enable people to show up as their whole selves, not some person who's trying to pretend to be somebody else in terms of what they think we want from them. Because the energy and the effort that takes completely sort of diminishes the performance they can deliver because they're so distracted being somebody else.
Yeah.
And so in that sort of psychologically safe environment, one of the things is this whole self. So people really showing up as who they are. I think is absolutely key. And kind of role modeling that in terms of I'm pretty open about who I am. You will gather that from this conversation. And asking the right questions so that you understand who people are, I think is absolutely key. And encouraging others to do the same, really important. I think the second thing is really valuing difference. So we've done a load of work over the last year to relaunch our employee networks. And there's a real piece about that difference is an asset for us in the organisation. And so being able to speak to your needs because of whatever your characteristics might be is so key, whether that's a religion, whether that's about actually even your background or where in the country you live and what we're asking you to do. Isn't always the kind of stereotypical components of difference. But how we enable people to show up like that and speak to their needs, I think is such a big part of a psychologically safe environment.
Yeah. And again, the research backs this up. And if you go back even to the psychoanalyst, Donald Winnicott talked a lot about true self and false self. And R.D. Laing spoke about if you're in the false self for too long, it can create basically a psychotic rape. Is the language used back in the 50s, but like mental health problems. And actually, if we want to create an environment where people can thrive, they have to be able to be themselves in order to be able to not have that inner turmoil that essentially causes us a lot of damage, because we're not good at acting all the time, But that's hard in a board.
It is.
So that's a super hard. And boards are often better than almost anyone, right? I mean, they're complicated people, high-powered egos. There's a lot of human psychology going on in that environment.
Always.
And is that so? You spent a lot of time in that world. Is that how you ended up in chief people officer world? How did that transition happen?
Yeah. So I spent the first decade of my partnership, a little bit more than that, advising clients in the people space, and as you say, primarily advising boards on the pay of really senior people and the associated sort of governance and structuring things.
Right. And
so I have seen most dynamics play out in a boardroom, I would say, but thankfully as an advisor rather than as a member of those boards. And obviously had a people experience set that went across a huge amount of the strategy, development, shaping of people strategy for organisations, particularly kind of big, large, complex organisations. And so when Marco got appointed senior partner back in 2024, he was looking at who he wanted to join his board. I was actually on maternity leave with my second son. And I think he was looking to have someone who had real people experience kind of come into that role. And so asked me if I would come and interview for the role, and then subsequently kind of got appointed to this. And I think it's fair that he saw the combination of kind of boardroom experience in terms of my content, in terms of day-to-day, with the broader set of people experience being something that could add differentiated value for us at this point in time.
And my experience with the CHRO, CPO community is that no two people's journey to the role is the same. So
that's true.
Going back to your point about diversity, you've got this amazingly diverse group of people taking these roles on. But for you have that insight into so many other organizational dynamics, and you must have seen so many different philosophies around how people are valued or otherwise, or like what the strategy is around people, how much that's embedded in the business. So when you were asked to take the role, what kind of went through your head? Were you thinking, oh goodness, now I could finally do, or what was it?
So I think there's probably three things. There's a huge amount of privilege of doing this role for an organisation that I feel so passionate about. Yeah. So the combination of being able to bring content to an organisation, I joined, driven by Tom Gosling, but I have loved working in genuinely over that period of time. Means that as you add value, you're adding it to something that you care about. And so that was hugely exciting and I guess differentiating to seeking a CPO role somewhere else, for example.
Yeah.
And the second one was probably fear. So we're probably back to the making partner imposter syndrome challenge of, particularly on the way back from maternity leave, kind of coming into this role, could I do it justice? And did I feel I could get my arms around it enough? And you're right, I had loads of content, but could I apply it in a professional services kind of world? And then I guess the third one was about family and impact. And so I've done the partner thing before. Could I do this and still keep to my boundaries? And that's been an ongoing theme for me for the last 2 years, because with Theodore, who's number 2, again, it felt I needed to make sure that was possible to be able to accept a role in the context of being, again, a new mum.
Yeah, it's kind of right back to the
There's definitely some
topic as well, right? You're thinking about, right, what's the balance here? What is different about being a chief people officer in professional services to another type of organization?
So obviously, that's a slightly impossible question to the degree of difference of organisation.
Sure.
But the thing that has made this job, the thing that's mitigated the concerns I've just set out, and the thing that has made this job so enjoyable is we are at this inflection point in terms of what the chief people officer role is and what this business needs from its people. And I think that that is all to do with the fact that we are a very highly skilled people set. So if I look at my 21,000 people, what's the real value that they add? It's about the knowledge, the experience, the context that they can bring to our clients. And so that's different to building something or making something in a different industry, quite similar to some other industries. Financial services probably is the most acute. And so what technology is doing to us at this point in time, what some of the cost pressures are doing to us at this point in time, means we have to quite fundamentally change the way that we deliver on our people strategy. And that's terrifying in the sense of these things are happening at a pace we all understand, but hugely exciting in terms of being able to have, I hope, a really positive impact on where we go next.
Do you think it's important that you have had the experience of, I imagine what lots of the PwC people's experience has been, you've been very academically able, went to a top university, came into the workforce, and so you've traveled the journey that a lot of people are traveling, and therefore you have more empathy with it, or do you think it's not important?
I think it is really important. I think for us at this point in time, understanding the model and the business in a lived way is absolutely crucial. I equally am careful of, to the diversity point, we have a huge mix of people, experience and trajectories in our business that have joined from the bottom, that have joined from the side, that have joined from high up at the side, and that bring skills and value to us in a hugely differentiated way. I'm therefore super cautious of not overly applying my experience to the way we think about decisions. So there's a balance, I think.
Yeah. There's something interesting you commented on earlier about how staring at all those spreadsheets early on in your career has had it informed you, right?
Yeah.
And it's interesting in the age of AI
Yeah.
to think about a lot of those type of jobs are now being automated, and those lived experiences therefore are different for that generation or that group of people.
Yeah.
And of course, no one has a crystal ball, so we don't quite know what the implication of that is.
Yeah.
But to your point about this pivotal, it's a paradigm shift, right, that we're in.
Absolutely.
And how you as a leader can help your people navigate that paradigm shift and still grow.
Completely. And there's a sort of strategic tactical answer to that, and there's a mindset answer to that, right? The strategic tactical piece is, you're absolutely right. It is we automate the things that can be automated. What we need to do is do even more on upskilling our people, because what it should do is move them up the pyramid. Actually done well, you grow as a result of the kind of AI productivity saving, because you can unleash more power of your people to be in the market with our clients, to be relationship building, to be really understanding what they need, and to be delivering on that in a different way. And so if we do that well, I think we can offer a more interesting career path and experience as we kind of go through our pyramid, supplemented by AI. The reality of AI in a more macro way is it's very disruptive. And so that creates uncertainty, and we're back to confidence and imposter syndrome and all those things. So how we, on the mindset side, ensure our people have the confidence, to use the tools, to use them in the right way, to innovate with them, and to see the benefit that will bring to them as an individual and to us as an organisation is really, really important. And getting that right and doing this all at the right pace is absolutely key.
Let's also think about how can these tools enable a more diverse group of people to enter a certain type of work. So I'm dyslexic, and it's been a big feature of my life. And I know now, because of AI tools, I can do things that I couldn't do before, be it remember things or access information more quickly. And that opens up, had I been coming into the workplace now, it would have opened up a whole world that wouldn't have been available before. So I think there's exciting kind of opportunities in that. But also, like, what's happening is the world is moving through lots of change, and change is a major risk to human beings. We're not brilliant at it, in truth, and nor is any other living thing on earth. And that increases the risk of burnout for our people. I know that's a topic you've spoken about. And tell me your kind of philosophy there.
So I think on burnout, there's a couple of things. One is we're a little bit back to psychological safety, ensuring that there is an environment where people can raise their hands when they need help, but also ensuring we ask. Because so often we find that we don't ask the right questions that mean that if somebody potentially might be near burnout, we haven't spotted it, which is really important, but ask the question. And it's not a complicated question. The question is generally, are you okay? Tell me what's going on. And I think A, knowing we have the permission to ask that question, and B, looking to ask it is really, really key. Of course, the ideal world is we never get there. And I think a lot of time has been spent sort of on burnout when it's happened and how we get people back into work and how we support them through that. What I really want us to go after is resilience and supporting and sort of work in the flow of to make sure that we reduce the burnout risk. And that's, we've done a lot in the last couple of years and we'll continue to do this. How do we support each other with resilience? How do we support our people with resilience, what it means for them? We're back to boundaries and exercise, but also where you go for help. Who can you ask? How can you say I'm struggling? How do we have an environment that enables us to put our hands up and say when we need help? That is so important to me. I also think, to your point about pace and technology, it becomes way more relevant. This isn't just when an individual might be near burnout. Yeah. This is this bit of kit we've got. I'm not quite sure whether or not I'm using it in the right way. Or how do I think about this in a different way? Or can we do this together? There are so many places where I think we're going to need more help as individuals within the kind of PwC, in this case, environment. And so pushing that environment to be able to ask for that and that being a positive thing to the multi-decade relationship to all of those things is really key to me.
And a lot of the kind of themes we're touching on are fundamental parts of a mental health strategy, right? Yeah. And how an organization thinks about embedding this.
Absolutely.
How have you gone about creating a strategy around mental health and well-being? Has it been something that's been embraced by the leadership team? Have you had pushback? What's been your approach to that?
So I think that the leadership team are totally on board with it. We talk about this, I suspect, more than is sort of the average in terms of the way that we look at this at executive committee level. We've just had Mental Health Awareness Week. I tell you, we ran a sort of cocktail party for our charity partners and 2/3 of the Exco turned up to that, which is, they are very busy people, but actually that kind of speaks to how important it was. One of our key partners is Mental Health UK. We were doing a kind of breakfast with them. And again, one of the Excos sort of saying, can I come to that? So that sort of intent, I think, from the senior leadership is definitely there.
I agree. I think you have to have that senior leadership. And I think people telling their own lived experience really helps to normalize. And I think asking people, are you okay, is critical. And yet it's so hard to do that conversation well, in truth. We're so well versed in how are you, I'm fine, how are you, I'm fine, right into business. Is that something that you intentionally address with your managers? Do you think about that manager level, and setting the tone?
We definitely do. And I think we definitely do. We could definitely do more of it. Probably it's a very fair challenge. We did a fantastic session with some of our partners in an offsite a couple of months ago, where we had an external facilitator who effectively had them talk to each other for 2.5 minutes, and the other person couldn't talk. So you had to just listen. I mean, excruciatingly painful. I think for everyone, maybe even more so for people of that level operating in a sort of very fast-paced way. But one of the real unlocks from that in the conversation we got to in sort of the reflections was you didn't need to solve the person's problem. All you needed to do was listen. And so much, I think, of the way that we encourage our kind of leaders, managers to intervene is so much about being there to listen, being there to be somebody who cares and who engages with a problem at a point in time, but isn't expected to, doesn't have to own the problem, take the problem away, solve the problem. And I think where we can make that mind shift happen, we do get better impacts and a better environment as a result.
I love that you've done as an exercise. It reminds me of, and I can't remember the name of the man, but there was a GP who designed this form of supervision for other GPs. And essentially what would happen is that there'd be a group, let's say 5, so medics sitting down the table, and one person would have 10 minutes to speak about something that's on their mind. Right. So they'd start speaking, there'd be a facilitator. And over that 10-minute period, no one else is allowed to speak. So what always happens, I've done many of these sessions, what always happens is the person speaks for 2 or 3 minutes, and it's like, I think I've said everything. But there's no way that the rest of that
Nobody fills the void.
void, you're not allowed to. So you then sit like a couple of minutes, and then the person realizes, oh, I'm going to have to speak. And then they start realizing there's more they want to say about the topic.
Yeah.
Then at the end of the 10 minutes, the group is allowed to ask clarifying questions.
Yeah.
And then the group speaks for 10 minutes without the person being able to speak. And they're not allowed to problem solve, they're just talking about it.
Yeah.
And then at the end, the person who originally brought it from then reflects.
I love that.
And without fail, people's minds are really blown by it, because it makes you realize how we're not fundamentally listening to one another. And going back to that idea of like spotting signs, I'm a massive Star Wars fan and a psychologist. So, I'm interested in the topic broadly, but actually spotting signs and symptoms, almost impossible unless you know someone.
Yeah.
And even if you know someone, you can miss it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I love that. I might steal that with pride. I stole this with pride. And actually, my chief of staff and we were on a train going somewhere, and she didn't know I'd been to this thing. I said to her, right, talk to me for 3 minutes about where you are. Exactly this. Yeah. And I mean, she's incredibly good, incredibly high performing, but she found the 3 minutes really difficult. And we still are reflecting on that was one of the best conversations we've had. Yeah. And there is definitely space to listen.
Yeah.
Is a really meaningful tool that we undervalue.
And actually, it links to another topic I know you're passionate about, which is how you actually get your people to connect. And we've obviously, one of the many changes we've been through has been the arrival of technology in the workplace.
Yeah.
COVID, remote work,
Yeah.
everyone working at home, and then remote working and hybrid working. And I know you've spoken about that. You've been involved politically around that. Can you tell me how that topic relates to this in your mind and for PwC?
Yeah, so you're absolutely right. I think community is so important. So if we sort of go to the kind of what's my philosophy on this, to the whole self point, to the belonging, to the support, having a community, having a tribe, having your people, senior people to learn from, junior people to support, others to, hang out with and do whatever your socializing activity might be. That is how we all, we're ultimately humans at the end of the day. And so enabling that within our ecosystem, I think is critically important to the way we support people to be their best in our environment. And now what does that mean, right? How do you do it? And you have to get really tactical on this. So I'll give you two sort of big answer, a small answer. So the big answer is we have pushed quite heavily to have people back into the office. And we've done that to an extent that is higher than our competitor sets. We've asked people to come back 3 days a week, and we're pretty hard over on that. I think what's been the unlock on that, and it's probably taken us 18 months to embed it, is the why. That is not because I am somebody's lunch monitor and want to tick them through our door. It's not because we don't trust them. We're absolutely convinced they work wherever they are. It's the work as an individual compared to the collective impact that can have on both what we can achieve for our clients, but also the amount we can teach and learn from each other, the way that we integrate teams and work together is completely differentiated. And what's lovely is we're now seeing that come through in the data. So the people where we have that working well, people are more engaged, they're more happy, they speak to a higher learning experience. There is just a reality that we are human at the end of the day and we need to be humans together. But equally, and I would say this given what else I've said, more flexibility in our system, really important. Support for working parents, support for people with caring responsibilities and all other complexities of life, that it's not 5 days a week and that we're very flexible about how it deploys, really important to enable the broader set of people to bring value in our organisation. And so that means you have lots of hybrid calls. So my micro example, and again, this actually came from an external speaker, getting everyone on a call to introduce themselves. So the observation was, and actually this is also true in physical meetings, we have a different hierarchy in the room. The sort of natural positioning is the senior people talk and the most junior people don't talk. And if you put that on screen, it's even more exacerbated. But once you unlock I've put my voice in the room, you get much more impact. And so the advice that she gave, and again, I've sort of taken this away, get everyone to speak in the first 5 minutes. Whether it's what did you do at the weekend, what did you have for tea, or how are we all feeling about this project today, give me a colour or a number. I don't think it matters. But I love that, again, to the unlock, get to a community of people on a call in a meeting, not a set of individuals who, aren't feeling able to contribute in the same way.
And I think that makes perfect sense. It's knowing each other ultimately and being human again.
Yeah.
It comes back to the same
It does.
principle.
It does.
I'm looking forward to, and I know the technology is in existence, but when we can actually look into a screen and look into someone else's eyes versus either a camera or you're not looking into each other's eyes, that human connection is so important. I think every company or organization has a slightly different take on hybrid, remote, bullying. And I think that my observation, and from the conversations I've had, is that what works is when it's aligned to the culture of the organization. I wonder, for you as an organization, you have famously large cohorts of graduates join annually and you yourself have reflected on how more senior members of the team, when you joined, had big impacts on you. Is part of the thinking, therefore, around that intergenerational crossover and connection?
Definitely. And so the way that we connect our teams from top to bottom is really important to us. I think that our partners are really thoughtful, and we encourage them to be really thoughtful about the light or the shadow that they cast, the impact that they can have from a hello, how you doing, or a well done on that thing, or and so that is really important when we have quite a sort of big spread in terms of seniority in our organization. And the way that we connect through that in the teams that we run and the way that we do things is really, really key. I think as well, in our culture point, so we've pulled out 4 cultural priorities to sort of amplify that in our behaviours. So one is be collaborative. So it's sort of all in the title. How do we get people to work together more? And that doesn't just mean in a peer group, it means cross peer group to all of those points. Be clear. So one of the things we've tried to go after much more and again, this is why I like it applies to the pyramid. How are our graduates clear about, I don't, given a piece of work to do, please can you clarify for me X, Y, and Z? And the permission, again, to kind of put that voice in, have that differently, similar to partner saying, this was 90% good, but 10% not good. The 10% is important in terms of the learning for the individual and those things. Be curious, so all about learning, but then you can ask questions. Mr. Partner, why did you change this document like this? And again, that permission set on connection through the whole organisation, really, really key. And the final one is be inspiring. And we debated this a lot. And be inspiring is not about our partners and their leadership. I mean, it is in part, but I genuinely believe everyone can be inspiring. It's to the whole bit of this conversation. That be inspiring is, how are you? It is what's happening in your life that I can't see. Those things actually, in terms of how people feel seen, heard, and inspired, are really important. And so I like that one because I think we can help people unlock it wherever they sit in our organisation and to whatever cohort they interact with.
Well, I'm certainly being very inspired by the conversation today, and I could happily spend a long time speaking, but I know we're coming towards the end. So a couple of final questions for you. As you look out over the landscape today and the changes that we're seeing from AI in the workplace, what do you think is the key role that the people functions in organizations can play to make sure that every worker is benefiting from that?
Yeah, so I pull on 2. One is the training, retraining, reskilling. That could not be more important to us. How we support our people in having the best possible skill set, human skills, technical skills, technology skills that they can have, I think is absolutely key. And that is true from the day they walk in the door to the day that they retire. And so how we support them through that to be as effective and confident in this world today and to use their skills in the best way, really, really key. The second one is around ensuring we continue to have an inclusive environment. So the risk of all the technology benefit that we've talked about is that it doesn't land equally. And actually both in terms of how and who we recruit, and that we're looking at that from a skill set basis, not from a most access to AI as they've come through education, for example, basis, but actually how it then deploys into our machine and how we ensure equity through that and all the dimensions of that, absolutely key. And so making sure that what is a huge advantage for our organisation and the value that AI can bring works in a way that supports some of our core values is really, really key.
And I think you're absolutely right. And I think that it, as a topic, probably needs much more attention. Because I think that we're starting to see, super users and people who are just so accomplished at it, getting all the advantages. But actually, for people who maybe need more support, they're going to struggle.
could not agree more. And some of the unlocks are quite easy. So we do something called One Firm One Day, where we basically encourage all of our people to volunteer for this one day. And it was all around skills transfer. I did it a couple of weeks ago, and actually we had the whole Exco involved in this. We had an AI upskilling event across the country with, I think it was 1,500 social enterprises. And so they all came and we were doing kind of training with them around how do you use AI within your businesses. Two things struck me. One was, in some cases, how much distance they had to travel in terms of where they were today and probably where they needed to be. But two was actually that from when we started using AI to now, the ability to travel that distance has got way easier and way quicker. Building an agent, when we started doing this, we had to have real experts building agents. Now, ChatGPT Enterprise will build you an agent, will build me an agent, and I am not technologically enabled. And so actually, what is the blocker? It's probably 90% confidence, because it's mainly accessible, these things now. Yeah. And actually how we help the have-nots in your example have that confidence, and what our role is in doing that beyond our walls as well as within our walls, we are very thoughtful about.
I would love to hear what's inspiring you. So what book at the moment or recently do you think people would enjoy?
So I guess in the context of what we're talking about today, and actually I think I was late coming to this book, but The Body Keeps the Score is something that I read when I was away at Easter. I think that the connection of that to kind of physical and mental health, and actually being much more rounded in the way that you think about that. I probably thought I knew that on some level, but it really brought to life for me the reality of the importance of that balance. And I think it as a person, but how I need to drive that into our organisation even more was really acute.
Did you read it or did you listen to it?
I read that.
Are you an audio book person?
I am an audiobook person.
Okay, yeah, I do. I like audiobooks as well. Also love podcasts. So what podcast are you a podcast person?
I am a podcast person.
Okay, super.
So I go through all the news podcasts as a kind of daily way to work and thing. But the thing that I've got into recently, to the conversation we've had, my perspective on AI feels so important. My perspective on technology and how that disrupts us feels really acute at the moment. So I got a recommendation from someone to listen to Tech Dirt, which is a really excellent it's quite a sort of disruptive podcast. It's nowhere near as sort of professionalized as some of the things I listen to.
Final question for you. As we look forward, we're in a world with continued geopolitical uncertainty, continued inflationary pressures, the arrival of a once in a multi-generational piece of technology, workplaces which are grappling with remote hybrid, all of this stuff, a mental health crisis unfolding in front of us. What is your ask of the people functions around the world around mental health? How do we approach this topic over the coming years?
So I think that whatever the people in our organisation do and whatever we ask them because of technology, they are still human beings. And therefore the need for us to treat each other in our walls and outside of them like human beings is really important. And that comes to the way that we think about respect, the way that we think about inclusion, the way that we think about enabling people to show up. Those things I think are the tenets that give space for good mental health in whatever context of disruption, and there are lots of them, as you say, kind of show up. There's a risk that in professional services, people confuse capability with invulnerability. And those are not the same thing. Intellect does not protect you from stress, things that happen outside work in your personal lives, anxiety, all of those things. Actually, I think there are times when it potentially exacerbates them because the nature of those individuals is they set very high standards for themselves, they have very high goals, and they struggle sometimes when they don't achieve them. And so actually the way that we support that is really, really important. And I think we have to be even more acutely thoughtful about it in that context.
And it's also harder for that group who are maybe high achieving at everything they've done to then turn to somebody and say, I need help or I can't cope. Which I guess in turn means the environment that they're operating in needs even more psychological safety.
Exactly. And that comes back to psychological safety and how we think about all of this, because the way that we set up an environment, there's all the baseline support that you'd expect from us as an organisation that prioritises mental health. But actually it's the environment that I think really makes the difference to that. How we enable an environment where A, people ask, are you okay? Do you need help? But B, they provide the space for people to answer those questions and to put their hands up where they need help. That's driven into our culture, but how we do that in the right way is absolutely key. Because without that, I have this sort of very weak analogy. People come to work with their backpacks, and everyone's got a thing in their backpack. Some of them are really big backpacks, some of them are little backpacks, but we're all carrying something. If we don't allow some of that to be shared, the backpack just gets heavier and heavier, and our ability to perform at work, but also beyond work in the way we interact with all the other people that are in our lives, is seriously kind of hampered. And so I feel like that is absolutely key.
It never fails to amaze me what my children put in their backpacks whenever I open them up. I totally agree with you, and I love that call, which is essentially keep humanity at the heart of work.
Definitely.
Because ultimately our people are what make us successful.
100%.
Thank you so much for your time today. It's been lovely speaking.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Lead From Within, brought to you by Unmind. Subscribe to the podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. Leave us a like and please do review if you found it valuable. Follow Unmind on LinkedIn for updates on all things regarding leadership, performance, and well-being. To find out more about Unmind's workplace well-being solutions for enterprise businesses, please go to unmind.com. That's unmind.com. Thank you and see you next time.